And then he delivered a khutbah to the army, and this is like the Muslim constitution when it comes to warfare, the rules and regulations of war in Islam. لا تخونوا ولا تغلوا ولا تغدروا ولا تمثلوا ولا تقتلوا طفلا صغيرا ولا شيخا ولا امرأة ولا تعقروا نخلا ولا تحرقوه ولا تقطعوا شجرة مثمرة ولا تذبحوا شاة ولا بقرة ولا بعيرا إلا لمأكله وسوف تمرون بأقوام قد فرغوا أنفسهم في صوامع فدعوهم وما فرغوا أنفسهم له وسوف تقدمون على قوم يأتونكم بآنية فيها ألوان الطعام فإذا أكلتم منه شيئا فاذكروا اسم الله عليه. O army, stop and I will order you 10 things. Learn them from me by heart. You shall not engage in treachery. You shall not steal from the booty. You shall not act unfaithfully. You shall not engage in deception. You shall not indulge in mutilation. You shall kill neither a young child, nor an old man, nor a woman. You shall not fell palm trees or burn them. You shall not cut down any fruit-bearing tree. You shall not slaughter a sheep or a cow or a camel except for food. You will pass by people who occupy themselves in monasteries. Leave them alone and leave them alone with what they have busied themselves with. You will come to a people who will bring you vessels in which are varieties of food. If you eat anything from these dishes, mention the name of Allah over them. These were the words of advice that Abu Bakr gave to his armies. There are a few statements here that I'm going to note. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq said, you shall not engage in treachery or deception. While we know that Rasulullah said in a hadith, al-harbu khud'ah. I'm going to bring up these contradictions and then comment on them. Abu Bakr is saying that you should not engage in deception, and Rasulullah says in the hadith, war is deception. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu said, do not kill neither a young child, nor an old man, nor a woman. But somebody can come up and say, we know of 2 cases at least where Rasulullah has ordered the execution of a woman. And we know that Rasulullah was engaged in, or he at least sent out Sariyah that engaged in tabit, and that is attacking an enemy at night in their residence. And you get some collateral damage where some innocent people die, women, children, old men. And then you have Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu saying, you shall not fell palm trees or burn them. And we know for a fact that Rasulullah in Ghazwat Bani Nadir has cut down palm trees and burned them. So how can you bring these issues which seem to be contradicting together? The first issue, you shall not engage in deception. And Rasulullah says war is deception. During war, you can engage in deception and you can trick your enemy. But you should not engage in deception when you make an agreement with your enemy. If you have a truce with the enemy, if you negotiate with the enemy, if you negotiate a ceasefire with the enemy, there should be no deception. So while the battle is raging, you can engage in deception. But when you sit down with the enemy and it's expected that you stick to your word, then you should not be deceptive. So I hope that the two are clear. The next issue, when Abu Bakr says, do not kill a young child, nor an old woman, nor an old man, nor a woman. Rasulullah applied that standard and never killed women or old men or children because they are non-combatants. But in the situations where a woman did engage in one way or another in fighting the Muslims, Rasulullah approved their execution. So the reason why a woman or an old man are spared is because they are non-combatants. But the moment they turn into combatants, then the same rule of combatants applies to them. And the issue of tabit, when an army would attack an enemy at night, non-combatants should not be harmed, but in a situation where the Muslim community could be harmed, then it's a priority to protect the Muslims. The protection of the Muslims is paramount, all the time. The protection of the Muslims comes before protecting anyone else. So in the situations where there was a need for tabit, or like in the siege of Ta'if where the catapult was used, you don't know where their missiles are going to land. But the general rule is that non-combatants should not be harmed. You shall not fell palm trees or burn them. In Ghazwat Banu Nadir, Banu Nadir decided that they're going to hide in their fortresses. They had these powerful forts, castles, and they have so much ammunition and they have so much food in those forts that they can survive a long siege. Now their farmland was outside the forts. And that's always the case. You would have forts and then you would have the farmlands outside the forts. You don't have the farmlands inside the forts because then the fort would be so huge and big. So the forts enclose within them the residence of the people and their farms are outside. So they said, we're going to hide in our forts, and after they have betrayed Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we're going to hide in our forts. And since Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam does not corrupt in the land, he's not going to touch our farms. To their amazement, they find that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was cutting the palm trees down and burning them. Now they knew that they cannot survive a long siege without their farms. How are they going to live? So that thing broke their resistance. When Rasulullah cut down the trees and burned them, that broke the resistance, and that is when their forts fell one after another. And they would go around saying, "Yanha Muhammad al fasad fil ard thumma yahriqu nakhilana." Muhammad is claiming that he doesn't cause corruption in the land, and here he is cutting down our palm trees. So is this corruption or not? Allah Azza wa Jal revealed an ayah to clarify the situation. Allah Azza wa Jal says, ما قطعتم من لينة أو تركتموها قائمة على أصولها فبإذن الله وليخزي الكافرين. Whatever you have cut down of their palm trees or left in standing on their trunks, it was by permission of Allah, and so He would disgrace the defiantly disobedient. So Allah Azza wa Jal said that I approve what Rasulullah did. So it's not fasad. It cannot be called fasad, corruption in the land. What the enemy thought is that they can take advantage of the kindness of the Muslims and the tolerance of the Muslims and use it against them. But Rasulullah was making it clear, you are not going to take advantage of me. Yes, I do not like cutting down the trees and destroying the farmlands, but if you're going to use that against me and try to take advantage of me and my community by doing that, I'm not going to allow you to do that. So here is setting a rule that the Muslims are tolerant. And the Muslims want Ameen for the people, security. However, the tolerance of the Muslims is not going to be used against them. So the general rule is that we should not cut down trees nor kill the animals. Here Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radhiallahu anhu is saying, do not slaughter any of these animals unless you're going to eat it. So that's the general rule. But if it's going to ever be used against the community, then you strip your enemy that opportunity. Same thing with وَلَا تُمَثِّلُوا, do not mutilate. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam never mutilated the dead bodies of his enemy, nor did he torment them. But there was one situation, which is mentioned in Sahih al-Bukhari, where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and this case stands out. I mean, something that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam didn't do before and never did after. Where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam held these shepherds, and he had their eyes plucked out and their arms and legs amputated, and then he left them in the desert to die out of bleeding and thirst. And the narrator of the hadith would say that I would see them rolling and licking the rocks and sand out of thirst, and nobody would give them water. Now this is something that Rasulullah never did before nor did after, but he did it because of the cruelty that these shepherds were involved in. They were not shepherds, they were men from Urana. These men killed the shepherds of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the way they did it is by plucking out their eyes and leaving them in the desert to die out of thirst. These men came to Medina and they said, we're Muslim, and they gave shahada. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. But then they became ill in Medina. So they asked Rasulullah for a cure. Rasulullah told them to go out and drink from the milk and the urine of the camels. For them, for this particular case, it was medicine. They went out with the camels, and these were camels of sadaqah, belonging to the sadaqah, and they were camels belonging to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They went out and they betrayed Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They killed his shepherds in that cruel way, and they took the camels and ran away. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam immediately sent an army to bring them back. Because of the betrayal and because of the cruelty they were involved in, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam wanted to teach the Bedouins, the nomads, a lesson. And this to act as a deterrent. You're not going to take advantage of us. And you're not going to come and lie to me and say that you are a Muslim, and then you go and you kill my shepherds and take my camels away. So it was a very strict punishment that Rasulullah did to them, but it acted as a deterrent for the rest of the tribes, and they never involved in something like that again. I mean, we never knew that they did this to a Muslim after that. So the Amir of the Muslims needs to make a judgment on when to apply the general rule and when to apply the exception of the rule. But the general rule is what Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu anhu is mentioning here. For example, with the monks, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu anhu said, you will find these monks, and these were Christian monks, ruhban, who would devote themselves to a life of zuhd and ibadah. Very austere lifestyle. They would live in these monasteries. They would not get married, celibacy. They would engage in some extreme measures. There was this saint in Andalus, a nun. She's proud of what she has done. She said, I have never ever in my life bathed at all, with the exception of the tips of my fingers when I would perform mass. So they involved in this strict ibadah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not command them. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu anhu said, leave them alone. Do not kill them, do not harm them. دعوهم فيما هم فيه. Leave them. These are not going to fight you, they are non-combatants, do not harm them. Even though they were involved in wrong, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu anhu is saying that we should protect them. Now, should that rule hold on with the Templars? The Templars were priests, but they were a fighting order of the Catholic Church. And they were the most severe and strict and tough out of all of the crusading armies. The worst among the crusading armies and the most brutal and cruel were the Templars. And these were monks. They were fighting monks. So could this rule apply? They're a very extreme and fanatic order, and they wreaked havoc among the Muslim lands in Palestine. So there must be a judgment of where to apply the rule and where not to apply it, and that is something that the Khalifa, who is a mujtahid, does. Notice, by the way, that a lot of the ijtihad was done by khulafa and umara because their position demands it. Like Umar ibn Abdul Aziz radiyallahu anhu is considered one of the scholars of the ummah, and there's a lot of ijtihad that he has done. It's more than a mufti or a scholar, because as a Khalifa or as an Amir, you are the one who's being faced with situations and you are in the real world. So the need for that ilm, and that's why one of the conditions of Khilafah is ilm, knowledge. The Khalifa needs to be knowledgeable so that they can make ijtihad in the situations that they're faced with.